there are these human extension officers, like in this example, who literally go from village to village and door to door to try to convince farmers that they have knowledge that those farmers don't have. And so imagine somebody comes to your door and knocks on your door and says, "You don't know me, but I know how to do your job better than you." Okay? It's very likely that you will not feel compelled to listen to that person. And that's exactly what happens to most of these extension officers. They're largely ignored. So we tried to figure out whether or not there was some way that we could use some kind of technology to help. And ultimately what we focused on was the use of video, which we knew from a previous experiment that video was very good in terms of convincing populations regardless of their literacy levels. And Rick and Gandhi, who was another researcher, he spent 6 months in the field trying out different combinations of how to use video, what to record, who to show it to, how to show it, and so forth. And all of that over a 6-month period where finally he came up with what he felt were 2 key ingredients to make video an effective means for convincing farmers to take up new practices. The first one is what we call participatory content production, where both the extension worker and a farmer are involved. And basically, when the farmer is learning a new technique, the extension worker is there with a camera, and we record the farmer learning a new technique. The second part is mediated instruction, where videos are shown in scheduled sessions in the village, and there is a mediator who is hired from within that village to mediate the screening itself. And what mediation involves is occasionally pausing the video and then asking questions of the audience so that the audience is engaged and participates. And we found that if you don't have the mediator, the audience does not gather, and if you do manage to gather them, they'll leave. It otherwise becomes a passive TV watching experience, whereas with the mediator, it makes a complete difference. Again, when Ricken felt that this was working quite well, we decided to do an experiment to see if it actually worked. So we tested digital green, which is the version with the video, in 8 villages. Another 8 villages using the classical extension system, which is just an individual extension officer. And then 4 villages where we had something we called poster green, where everything worked as with digital green, but instead of videos, there were posters. And these are the results. So one thing you'll notice is that this green line, which represents the digital green conversion rate, is dramatically higher than the little blue bars, which were the classical green cases. This difference is about 7 times. And the interesting thing is, even though we are adding more technology, we are allowing the extension officer to serve more villages because he doesn't have to visit the same village as often as he used to visit. And so we are saving a lot on the salary of the extension officers. And as a result of that, the overall cost is actually the cost of converting one farmer to a new technique is 10 times less expensive than the previous system. Okay, so this is a cost savings. At this point, Digital Green has done quite well. It won the Stockholm Challenge Award, which is an international ICT4D project award. We've been running Digital Green itself in about 12 or 13 villages, again, several hours outside of Bangalore. And we're now in the process of spinning off a new nonprofit organization that will effectively teach this particular technique to other agricultural organizations that have something to say to farmers. This is a project where the final contribution to Microsoft is just the knowledge that we've gained, as well as any potential PR that comes out of it, but no revenue. And so our best bet is to scale through external partners. Okay, so just to summarize, the 3 things that we really emphasize in the informal research are immersion, design, and then evaluation. And what's really important in all 3 cases is to make sure that you are really looking for something that ultimately has impact regardless of the technology. And then what we do, as I mentioned, is that partnerships, of course, are important. In all 3 cases, the partners that we worked with were with us every step of the way. Sometimes we had to explain what it was that we were doing. Sometimes they had to tell us that we were doing something completely crazy. But that interaction is really what makes sure that these projects are ultimately relevant and that the technology is being used in an optimal way. Sometimes local communities have ideas about how technology should be used, but they're not 100% informed. I want to go on to a few key lessons before I close. So I think one of the first lessons that we found is that it's very unlikely that you will find interesting solutions to real development problems if your idea is technology first. In other words, if the goal is to get technology out, to disseminate technology, one of the words that's, the phrases that I really think is the wrong phrase is the digital divide. If the goal is to close the digital divide, that's the wrong problem, right? The developed world came to its developed status without any computing technology. So it's obviously possible to do development without the technology. What you're really looking for are opportunities to apply technology to a real end development goal. So it's very critical that you have that development goal in mind. The second thing is that the time in the communities is really indispensable. As I mentioned, there's nothing that substitutes for the experience of actually going to a particular community in the field and experiencing it. And I would say even 1 hour of doing that is better than, days and weeks of studying research papers and books on a particular culture. If you're really interested in doing an innovation for another group, you have to really go there and understand it. The multidisciplinarity of our team, I think, is one of the things that allows us to do the work that we do. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of it has to do with this kind of tension between the different fields and how they see the world. And I would say every discipline has a view into what should really happen. And it's really only by combining them that you get a very complete picture. You can certainly do development without a multidisciplinary team. You can do research without a multidisciplinary team, but what I find is inevitably it becomes one-sided. So if you rely on economists too much, they're thinking in terms of entire countries, and they're not considering, what small changes you can make to a particular process that might make it better. If you look at anthropologists, they're often so focused on the differences between societies that they're not interested in what is general across human beings. If you look at technologists, they tend to think of technology first rather than trying to solve a particular problem first. Quality in all of our work, I mentioned this in the panel, but it really comes through having very strong quality researchers as well as quality partners. And I think that is something that you have to just select for at the beginning. It's very hard to do any of these things through process. And one of the things that I find a great mistake is, especially these days, there's a lot of talk about the design process. And if you talk to anybody who has just freshly graduated from design school, they will proudly tell you all of the different design processes that they know. But one thing that's interesting is that people who are good at design often totally ignore those processes. There's something about design that is separate from the process. I won't say it's not teachable, but it's certainly not teachable through process. I've seen plenty. It's just because you get a MBA degree in business, it doesn't mean that you'll necessarily be a great businessman. And so there's no correlation between the schooling and the actual capacity. And then finally, sustainability. Sustainability is one of the buzzwords that you hear all the time in development, and there is no magic bullet. Sustainability is a case-by-case situation, just like there's no magic bullet to establishing a well-functioning business. You can't guarantee a profit ahead of time. You have to be very careful about everything. You have to have a good management team. You have to have a good business model. You have to have, and all of these things take special effort and are different for every possible case. So any hope of doing sustainability in a generalizable way, I think, is misguided. Also, the other thing about sustainability is that most of the models that you see sustain are also very different. So, sometimes it works as a well-funded NGO, sometimes sustainability comes through a business model, sometimes sustainability comes through government and so on. And so the goal is to pick the right one for the particular project. And the last thing I'll say is that even though we are doing research, and research is our short-term goal, our ultimate goal is to have some kind of final impact on development. And I think the hardest thing, both for researchers as well as many practitioners, is to let go of particular ideologies that we may have learned in school or in various communities. Because in the end, it doesn't really matter what the ideology is if the project works and it does so in an efficient way without causing too much negative byproducts. So one thing I'll mention is that to make sure that I'm not coming across as being overly ideological myself, is to suggest that these first three are things that we have found to be very effective, but for which I can also find counterexamples for which there are, where things have worked out very well. And one of the greatest counterexamples is the mobile phone. The mobile phone is possibly had the greatest impact in the world of ICT 4D in developing countries, and it was developed in a world in which probably none of the engineers ever thought about what it would mean if a poor villager somewhere in Africa were to use it. which suggests that you can actually succeed in IC4D without doing any of those things. But in general, we find that it nevertheless helps to do so.